how can we create a culture or change the culture that we're living in at the moment, which seems to be so negative towards men and seems to kind of not at all talk about the value of great fathers and kind of celebrate and uplift those things. How could we change that? Hello and welcome to the Perspicaz Podcast. This week we're talking about positive masculinity, and it gets a bit personal because we talk about our fathers. We're talking about how fathers shape identity, courage and confidence, what we can learn from good men, and why fathers matter more than society might like to admit. Enjoy. So last week we had a discussion about the manosphere, and we were talking about the toxic masculinity that we see in that particular space. But that obviously leads us onto a question about what does positive masculinity look like and how does it manifest? And of course, you and I have experiences of two wonderful fathers. And naturally, that meant that we have to have a conversation about our dads.
Exactly. I think one of the reasons we felt so impacted by the manosphere is because we couldn't recognize what we were seeing. One of the reasons we are friends is we have a lot in common. And one of those factors is the fact that we have fathers that have contributed to helping us become the way that we are and the way that we think and the way that we show up in the world, what we feel is important, what we value. And so we both found it was worth having a discussion around that, is what have our fathers taught us? And what have our fathers taught us also beyond providing and protecting? Because when we had the manosphere discussion, we recognized that something that was positive or something they were getting right was this idea of being a provider and being a strong protector, although misguided. And so if we had to explore some themes beyond those things, beyond being a provider and protector, we could then jump into a conversation having said, well, our fathers provided for us, our fathers protected us. What else did they do? So to start off and give some context to people watching, we are both only children. And we have both been raised with strong father figures. And what we mean by that is involved fathers, involved in what we do, who we are around, how late we get home, who we're hanging out with, what our hopes and dreams are, even our emotions. I don't know about you. Maybe this is just my overly involved Italian father, but very happy to buy my feminine products and engage with conversations I would rather not have had with him, but yet there he was. So just the idea of also feeling emotionally upheld, and not to say they were perfect in it. We are two very strong personalities. Like I said, Italian, insert all the stereotypes with that. Maybe not as many boundaries, maybe, unbalanced emotionally, if we're looking at, that kind of thing. But really just stepping into a very full role. I think I often found that I was never lacking with him. I was never seeking him to be something he just couldn't be. And I think for some friends, wanting a more emotionally involved father or less emotionally involved father, whatever it was, because there was an imbalance, I think we were very privileged to have someone that for the most part really holistically contributed to our upbringing.
Exactly. And also, I think that, very similar experience. And what that does is that it gives you, it definitely gave me the sense of men are wonderful people. And I don't share the same animosity that I see a lot online. I don't have the same experiences of bad masculine figures in my life. If anything, my father was this wonderful role model, a wonderful presence in my life. My grandfather, my uncles. I've been surrounded by wonderful men in my life. And so it's very difficult to hear all of the kind of negative responses and negative connotations given to men, or women talking about the manosphere guys and using that as some sort of blanket for all men and saying that, oh, this is what all men are like. And I think both of us have had that experience of, no, that's not what all men are like. And because I've had these experiences, I know that that's not true. And And I know how important these roles are. And I feel quite passionate about trying to correct this impression that's happened through people looking at the men in the manosphere and thinking, oh, that's what men are like. And or also having a simultaneous kind of condescension to men. So either
Mm.
they look at those men and they think, oh, how awful they are because they're embodying something that's a bit more proactive, or they're kind of actively putting out their masculinity. And then there's a sort of putting down of other men and trying to tell men to be quiet and they must just back out of society. It's time for a woman's world. And I think that there's so much negativity in both of those things. So having had my father, I'm very grateful for that experience. And it's interesting that you talked about your dad also being more on the emotional side, and my dad was also more on the emotional side. He was always in tears when we said goodbye at the airport. Like, it was very sweet. He was always crying. He also, would kind of come into my room and be like, okay, can we have a conversation about X, Y, and Z? You're entering a certain time in your life, and if you ever wanted to have this conversation, I mean, it's
Mortified as a teenager. Something that
yeah.
you've brought up, and I think we've both experienced, and something we've discussed previously, is our father was not just a father to us. Our
Yes.
father, my father especially, was just a father. He showed up in the world as a
Mm,
dad.
mm,
And to my
mm.
friends, to anyone who came across him, it was just
Yeah.
who he was, just this embodiment of what it means to be a father. Again, not
Mm,
perfection, humanity, flaws, but
yeah.
definitely the warmth and the heart to love, to take care of, to feed, to engage with. I remember a friend telling me, or being surprised, that my father was talking to her, and she said,
Mhm.
my father doesn't talk to us. We sit at the dinner table in
Wow.
silence, and then the kids get up and
Wow.
leave, and then they have their time together. And
Yeah.
I, to be honest, at the time as a teenager, thought that sounds amazing. to not to not be interrogated about my day, or
Yes.
just too much attention on what I'm doing and who I'm doing things
Mhm,
with. But
mhm, mhm.
again, as a mother, hindsight is this beautiful thing, and I think it's part of becoming a parent, is you really do reconcile a lot of what you deem intrusive as very
Yes.
loving, or at least at least the intention is very loving. And
Yeah.
yeah, for I think you've mentioned before, your biggest heart with your dad starting his business was very much around showing up as, hey, let me teach you the ways of the world.
Mm,
Let me
mm,
impart
mm.
skills. Let me
Yeah.
take responsibility and contribute to you going out into the world and being able to be an entrepreneur.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, well, firstly, my dad's whole thing was to be a teacher to help people, and as you say, he embodied that father energy not just for me, but for the people that he worked with in his business. I know, some of his employees have spoken to me about him being the big father, and that embodying that father role for some of them, especially those who didn't actually have a father themselves or a father figure in their lives. And then he also embodied it in the different kinds of activities that he was involved in. So he started a political party at one point because he really felt like there needed to be another movement, or there needed to be a bit more change. He was helping in different communities in Johannesburg. He was kind of constantly taking on this role of trying to take on as much responsibility as possible, and then embodying or imbuing me with the sense of, you need to go out, and if you see a problem in the world, you need to try and fix that problem yourself. Or also, you see an opportunity, then figure out what you can do around that opportunity, or take control of your own particular situation and work as hard as you can to create that freedom for yourself. But at the same time, it's about looking after yourself and being creative and proactively looking for the things that you can do, instead of being in this kind of passive mindset of thinking, how can others help me, or
Mm,
what can others do
mm,
for me?
mm.
Instead, it was always, what can you do for other people, or what can you be doing actively in your life? And that was that wonderful value. And I think, yeah, for both of us, having had fathers who ran their own businesses, um, and then to see how both of us have then gone on and also been running our own businesses and been proactive in that sense, which is such an interesting idea that as daughters, we've embodied those values of our fathers. You know, sometimes the idea is that the sons will be the ones that will follow the footsteps of the fathers, and then the daughters will follow the footsteps of their mothers. But instead, we seem to have absorbed that from the father side. Was your dad very involved in like helping you think about business things and helping you to kind of navigate the corporate world? And, you know, was he there with you in that, or how did he show up in that space?
What he imparted was a couple of stories around he would be working for someone, find the gaps, be too productive, and be told you're too productive, calm down, know your place. And in many situations, when he first came to South Africa, his bosses were threatened by him and he ended up leaving. And he would leave because pride. And what he said to me was always have a backup plan. Never allow yourself to be in a situation where someone has your salary, has you by your throat with your salary. And so that actually did happen to me. I was at a company and they had they changed leadership, and I had been contracting to them. I had this really amazing, flexible relationship with them. I loved the company. I loved working there. And at the farewell party, the new MD sidled up and basically said, "You're either in or out. You know, we don't do contracting here." And in that moment, I did embody my father, and I turned around and I said, "I don't need you." And, you know, that was it. I ended my relationship there. So that was definitely a big moment of don't allow other people to dictate, have have the kind of skills or have even just the self-respect to not allow that to happen. I think that's bigger than anything. Have the self-respect. I actually wanted to ask, what are some of your quotes? You know, some of the things that you found your dad saying to you that you might not realize have become little affirmations or narratives over your life. So yeah, I'd love to hear yours, and then I'll share some of mine.
Cool. Yeah, with my dad, I mean, in terms of quotes, my dad was always about trying to understand the motive behind what somebody is doing. So he would often say to me to listen to the words, but try to understand if somebody was trying to be malicious, or if they were just doing something out of incompetence, or if it was just a kind of self-serving situation, but always to try to look at somebody's motive. And then he always used to push the idea of you need to do things or act from a position that comes from what you want to do, and not because you feel pressured to do it for other people. And he would often say that to me in terms of friendships, for example. So sometimes I get upset because I'd feel like, oh, you know, but I keep inviting this person out, or I keep putting a lot of effort into this friendship, and this person doesn't seem to kind of want to do the same for me. And he would always say, yes, okay, yeah, it's disappointing, but do you want to do that? Like, if you want to see that person, then you should do that. Even if that person isn't giving back to you in the same way, you should always do what you want to do in terms of that relationship and give what you want to give. And then at the end of the day, you can feel good about who you were and what you did, and try as little as possible to be thinking about the other person and judging them for what they've done. And then he had another great thing about friendship, which was that he always used to talk about, like, you've got people at different levels of friendship, right? You will have people who are like your best friends, and that might be somebody, the amount of those people will be maybe what you can count on one hand. And those are the people that you tell everything to, and you have full trust and confidence in them. And they're probably very there's very few of them. And then you'll have your good friends. And often those will be people that you spend a lot of time with. You often, share a lot of things with, but you're not necessarily going to tell them everything, or you can't rely on them for everything. And they also might be context-specific friends. Those are the friends that you go do sports with, and those are the friends that you go dancing with, or those are the friends that you know through those other friends. So they're kind of context-specific friends. And then you'll have acquaintances, people that you know from certain environments, but they're not necessarily friends, but you know them and you're going to be polite and friendly. And then, and then there'll be people that you don't associate with. And he always used to tell me that you can always kind of move people up and down the list. So you don't necessarily need to cut people out of your life, but you can also just demote somebody to a different level, and then you can promote somebody to another different level. And that's sometimes a useful way to think about friends. It's funny because when you asked me about the quotes and things, I thought, oh no, maybe I'll have forgotten some of the things. But yeah, it's interesting.
I'll never forget. Because something I've noticed with yours, and this is going back to not necessarily always being a provider and a protector, really understanding a gap for you, maybe in terms of that, I think I can say it with confidence, being an only child and not having that socialization with a sibling that would allow you to navigate those kinds of relationships. We have a very different relationship with relationships. I was chuckling because it's yours was very people focused. Mine and my gap was very much on my attention span. And so all the quotes for me were, to every problem there's a solution. Don't give up. Plan 90%, do it 10%. Again, I'm a very trial through error kind of person. Not a lot of planning. And then I think this wasn't said in as much gentleness, but it was very much the thing of do it properly. Stop doing, the phrase was stop doing, in a very thick Italian accent, stop doing it half-assed,
Nice.
And so I can look back in that with kindness, having gone on a journey of maturity and growth. And recognizing that while there was sometimes frustration around my gap, there was still an intention to try close it. And that's really what we're also exploring is the emotional value that fathers bring into the space.
Totally.
The teaching. Yeah.
Yeah. And that support, it's not just that fathers are there to make the money and then to come home after work. And also I think sometimes there's a perception that fathers should be the disciplinarians, they need to kind of set down the rules. And then mothers are the ones that are soft and emotionally connected. And as we're talking, obviously our fathers were not. Our fathers were very emotionally connected. But also I want to pick up on the thing that you were talking about with your story, with the company, and the role that fathers play in helping you to do the difficult and scary things.
Yes.
Helping you to kind of have that backbone in particular kinds of situations. And like you were talking about the ability to have that sort of confrontational interaction and to have that strength from your father to go, no, okay, I'm leaving. I'm going to go and do the scary thing, which would be, which would be to leave this particular situation. And I feel that that's such a thing that I see from people who have good relationships with their fathers and some people who don't have good relationships with their fathers. There's like a willingness to engage in risk and to kind of launch yourself out into the world and to do things that are very scary. And then I see sometimes with other people who haven't had the benefit of that really good relationship with a father, that they're a little bit more timid. There's a little bit of kind of, I'm not too sure about taking this particular risk, or I'm not too sure about going off into the world and having this adventure or being able to confront this difficult situation. And I think that is a thing, that fathers are responsible for our risk-taking behavior and our risk-taking appetite.
From little.
So did you have experiences with your dad where you were encouraged to do scary things? Like was your dad the kind of toss you into the swimming pool and
two stories on that, yes. Let go of my, actually three. Let go of my bicycle. I did go into a tree because I realized he wasn't holding on, and I looked back and I went into a tree and I really hurt myself, but I was also fine. And so there was a lesson in it's okay. Maybe also a bit of a don't look back. But it's okay. And even if you crash, you will be fine. I think that's a narrative
Yes.
that's kind of
Yeah.
stuck with me. Even if you hurt yourself, you're actually still going to be okay. You tried.
Of course.
The one that has struck with me the most, that probably hasn't been the healthiest, but there was a healthy aspect to it, was my father swimming in a full length pool at a very little age. So my first time
Mm.
swimming in a full length pool. Um, and getting to the other end and realizing he wasn't there, and a little bit
Mhm.
of the panic, but him being on the other side being like, you did it
Yeah.
without me,
Yes.
and I wasn't even in the pool, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
building confidence through those very difficult things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there is a narrative now around helicopter moms, or at least with the absence of fathers, moms are more likely to assist and help and coddle
Mm.
than with the dads who allow for a lot more play and risky behavior. So as you were talking, I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
realizing it's not just within adulthood, but it actually starts very little, as building that framework of,
Yeah.
I can do this, I can do this, I can at least give it a go, or if I give it a go and I fall, I'm going to try again. Um,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. And
Mm.
being, because I think that um in terms of, okay, we're going to go into a bit of the psychology side. I'm thinking about how, in terms of attachment is talking about children's ability to, they're connected with their caregiver, and then how secure do they feel to go out and explore the
Mm,
world
mm.
and then come back. And I think that feeling of having a sense of security and stability, a place to come back to, that's that launch pad that they have to then be able to go out and explore the world. And our fathers giving us those experiences, like I'm thinking about what my dad did to me. Not that he did it to me,
Did
but
it? Yeah.
we we went sailing. So I grew up a lot going down to Cape Town and sailing in the lagoon there at our house. And one afternoon, my dad had been teaching me how to sail, and he decided that, okay, I was gonna go off and sail in the little monohull boat. I think it's called a dab chick, and it's a tiny little boat with one little sail, and it's perfect for you as a kid. And I must have been maybe 12 or 13 or something. So I'm not tiny, but I'm also not, like, I'm not a fully hatched teenager. and, I think, and so my dad decided that we were all going to do a sail across the lagoon, and he was going to go in the big boat with my mom and their friends and things. And I was there in the tiny little boat. And I can't tell you how terrified I was. And then I did capsize in the middle of the lagoon because I was busy sailing away. The wind kind of whipped behind my sail, flipped the boat over, had a whole panic. But it was all fine. It was all fine in the end. And my dad came kind of sailing round and, telling me what to do because he couldn't get out the boat to come and help me. So
Mm,
I had
mm.
to fix the situation for myself
Wow.
and then get back into the boat and then continue, because also you're in the middle of the lagoon. You're not going to be able to, you can't be like, okay, I don't want to sail anymore. You have to sort yourself out and get back to shore. And having him, that presence there, you didn't die. You managed, you were okay. He was there helping, but let you do it by yourself. I think
Mm.
those are those kind of key things that fathers are able to do. And I think maybe this is that difference between mothers and fathers. And so often I think the narrative is that mothers and fathers are just exactly the same. It's two
Mm.
adult parents,
Mm.
and a child just needs two of them, and between the
Or
two
one
they
of
can get
them.
all the things done. Or one of them, exactly. Or, one of them is fine and the other one is just needed for their money, and that's it. But I think that we really have to be more open and honest, or more interested and curious about what are the different things that both parents bring, both sexes bring, and by nature of their different characteristics and the things that they bring out in children and their different roles, understanding that it's not about equality in the sense of we're both exactly the same, but it's complementary. It's about what is it that you bring as the mother and what is it that you bring as the father, and how do those things combine, help the development of the child, instead of it being that the mother is the superior caregiver and everything should be focused on her and her involvement in her children. The father is this kind of satellite creature and drops in, drops out. But no, actually, we need to look at what are the two things that they do. And there's a little story that you told me about you and your experience with your your little boy, which I thought was really, really sweet. And it kind of encapsulated for me the two different roles. You were talking to me about how you were in this house, and I think there was a storm that was happening, and got really afraid by the wind that was outside his bedroom window, and came to you. And I remember you telling me about how you were talking to your husband about it, and saying that, your role is to be there to comfort him, to cuddle him, to speak to his fears and his anxieties. But then your role, Ben, and this is, I think, what you said that he did, is to take his hand and walk back to his bedroom and stand with him as he sees the wind on the window, and to show him that, okay, that's the scary thing, and we can both manage and confront the scary thing together. And I'm here with you to help you to do that. And I thought that's such a beautiful description of the two, your two roles as parents. Yeah. Do you remember that?
I do. It's the helping people face reality with confidence, with courage. I think courage is a big
Mm,
word there too, is cultivating courage, bringing comfort as a mother, and then cultivate. And it's not to say each role can't overlap. It's not to say I
yes.
can't teach my child courage. It's
No,
more
exactly.
recognizing what is the natural inclination, and then where do you have to step in or step up. And I do also think, to just have a disclaimer and say, there are moms who do stand in the gap because they recognize the
Completely.
gap, and
Or
what we're
dads.
saying is, or dads, yeah, what we're saying is not that under dire circumstances you can only have a functional parenthood with the presence of both. It's, we're
Mm, mm,
discussing particularly the modern cultural narrative around it's okay to be without this role
yeah.
completely. And
Mm,
and that's why unpacking this in our personal experience of how do dads actually add value is
mm,
hopefully going to bring the kind of insights that we're looking for, while we explore what else is happening in the world, and why we have a strong response to it. So um,
mm,
I don't know if you want to get into that now, is just modern some of the modern thinking around
mm.
fathers and their place in the world.
What do you notice? Because, so what's interesting about the two of us is that we are of roughly the same age, but then of this kind of different family situation. You're married, you have children. What do you observe about kind of the women and men of your age, similar families, and how people are navigating being mothers and fathers? Do you feel like there has been a big change in the way people are approaching bringing up their children as opposed to, our parents' generation? Do you see a difference in that, in their kinds of attitudes or what people are trying to do? I don't know if you feel like for example, how are people thinking about the division of provisions? So is it leading back to the traditional where the man should be doing more of the work, or do you feel like there is this more modern attitude of like we need to separate this equally? I'm going to go back to work as quickly as I possibly can as a woman, or we're going to try and make sure that there's more father time, or dad is working less, he's more
Mm,
stay-at-home dad, and I'm going to be more boss woman. What do
mm.
you notice in your kind of your surrounding?
I'm very controlling about who I surround myself with, if I'm honest, because as you said it, I said, my immediate thought was, we don't really associate, or at least where we've chosen to live and how we've chosen to live is
Hmm.
within our value system. And so our value system would be, for the people who can afford it. There are a lot of moms who are geared towards staying at home more than being out and working. There is,
Hmm.
I mean, that's a whole other discussion, and we do actually discuss it in my other podcast, because it was a reactive response to a group chat around this question. As there were moms who
Mm,
thought they would absolutely be ready to go back to work, they couldn't bear another second being on maternity leave, and then very quickly realizing they want to be at home. And then on the other
mm,
side of that, moms who thought, I'm going to be at home and be this homestead wife, and then going, oh my gosh, I'm losing my mind. I need to get back into the
and
working world. So
fascinating.
what I would say is both. but
Mhm.
there's maybe more of a middle for where we live and how we live, and definitely people trying to find a balance. There is a new, more balanced approach, which is a lot of moms agreeing that there needs to be a little bit of work and a little bit of flexibility. Those on the
Mm,
bell
mm,
curve, that's or yeah, rather on the scale, the extreme of working and no flexibility for family and having to rely on au pairs and other caregivers is putting there's a lot of guilt and also just a lot of longing to want to be with kids. And then on the other
mm.
side of that, being at home too much, and on either side, there are people who do that and it works for them. But
Mhm.
in general, I think, most people need a little bit of both. So that's with the moms. And then with the dads, I think I've seen maybe the biggest shift is there's definitely the two camps of he's involved, he's not involved. So there are
Okay.
dads
Interesting.
still that don't change nappies, don't really get involved with the kids. That's
Okay.
very much the wife's role, whether they work or whether they don't work. That's a it's back to what we're saying is maybe they think they protect and
Mm.
provide and that's it.
Yeah.
Versus a lot of the parents that I think we've naturally been drawn to are involved dads. Maybe that's
Mm.
because I also see my father within those men. And so there's a kind of trust. Oh, you're involved with your kids, you care about them, you're teaching them
Mhm.
things, ergo, you are good human, versus the men who are a little bit more emotionally distant. And while now, as we're talking, I
Mm.
acknowledge that for them, they are providing and protecting in their capacity. What we're
Yeah.
exploring is not, again, the narrative, not to say it's not enough, you need to give more and do more.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's more of a shift towards there is more that is required without it being a
Yes.
condemnation. It's more of
Yeah.
recognizing that maybe we're putting a lot of pressure to provide a kind of lifestyle
Mhm.
where,
And you don't need that level of a lifestyle because actually the
because being
important thing is the
present,
quality of time. Yeah.
yeah,
That's what I've been hearing a lot as well when I've been listening to lots of different people speak on this topic is that it's actually, the monetary value of the lifestyle that you have is not the thing that's important, and that the most important thing is the quality of time and the interactions and fathers being there. And I
yeah,
think you're right. There is that pressure that people feel, okay, well, it's not enough that I'm working and I'm providing for my family, that they have enough to eat and that we have nice clothes and that we're able to live in a relatively comfortable lifestyle. But it's that we also need to be going on lots of holidays. We also need to have, relatively fancy cars. We need to be doing X, Y, and Z. And I wouldn't want to judge people for that, for wanting to have a good lifestyle for their families. But I think that if they understood that actually the quality is in the quality of time spent and the memories, and that's the thing that's more important, then maybe we could take that pressure off of them having to display a certain kind of lifestyle. But then I have another question, which is that my observation is that there's very little support for new dads. And I just noticed, and maybe that's just because of the fact that most of my friends are women who've had babies, but I noticed how so through you, knowing that you have a support group for women and for new moms, and then friends of mine had a baby, and my friend is actually the guy in that relationship. But I was messaging them going, oh, your wife can join this group, and then here's all these resources for her, and here's all this, these things that she can do, and she can read up on this. And I was very conscious of the fact that there was nothing that I was sending him to, and there's no like groups for new dads to go, right, dads, this is what you've got to do. These are all the things. This is how you can help your wife. This is what your children need from you. And so I wonder if also there's an aspect of men going, well, I do know how to make money. So like that I can do. And
we tried. So
and
we tried a
really,
support group for men and no one joined it. There is definitely
wow.
something deeper to explore in that regard.
Yeah.
In summary, I would say men need to have a father or a kind of
Mm,
mentor that they go to, that they trust. I don't think they get support in the same way women do. Some do.
Yeah.
And I think they probably benefit so much from being open with other men or male friends, but I think
Mm,
they,
mm.
from what I've experienced, at least within my context, is it happens over a braai where there's just a moment of, this is hard, hey? Like, yes, it is, or, hey, dude, it's almost like there can't be any evidence of asking for
Right.
help. It has to be like
Okay.
so what do you
It just
do
sort of has to
with yeah, how do
surreptitiously
you, or, they just like
drop in.
observe, or it's almost,
Yeah.
I would say, just being around other healthy men that you've identified. They learn through
Okay.
osmosis, but they don't really talk and process as much as we do. And it is
Mm,
something we've explored. I think it is. I think there is something really sad. My husband found that also. He suddenly
mm,
realized, oh wait, actually, he had to go out and really seek out his dad friends and
mm.
cultivate that kind of relationship that is all very new. So
Yes.
yeah, so maybe to what you're saying, if they, I look at you were talking about your father and his dad being an example. I'm not really sure
Mm,
if my grandfather was an example. I don't have a lot of clarity on that. Maybe
yeah.
I think on the provision protector thing, yes, but not the emotional support thing. That was definitely my
Yeah.
grandmother. And I think my dad kind of integrated both. He recognized the need for both. And I'm very proud of him for breaking that
Mm,
cycle. Um,
yeah.
but if you don't have an example, which is what we're going back to with the importance of fathers and how you end up
Mm,
being, you know, um, on the very passive side or very over masculated side because there isn't really a healthy example of fatherhood. I think
yes.
that's a really good point.
Yeah. I wonder though, because if I'm thinking about my father and I'm thinking about my grandfather, one of the things that my father did when I was little, my mum tells me about it all the time, is that he was very active, involved with me as a baby in the sense that he woke me up in the morning and he would get me dressed and apparently used to play games with me all the time. And that was our little thing in the morning. And then he would rush home after work to be there for bath time and to like put me to bed and to be involved there. And I really think that that was him because I cannot see my grandfather having done that. My grandfather and my grandmother were very kind of part of the Capetonian British circles of things. And he had a very serious and important job, and they had lots of traveling to do, and they had lots of help. And so I don't know that I necessarily see my grandfather has having played those roles, but maybe he did. But I don't know that. Yeah, I'm not sure that my dad, I can't imagine him speaking to his father and
Uh,
getting that kind of feedback. So it was something that he obviously decided to do within himself.
I
And then
know.
again, I wonder because we're talking about these things and thinking about how could we make things better? So how can we create a culture or change the culture that we're living in at the moment, which seems to be so negative towards men and seems to kind of not at all talk about the value of great fathers and kind of celebrate and uplift those things. How could we change that? And then it's so difficult to notice that, well, you can't suddenly be creating support groups for men because they're not going to come to them. And you can't necessarily be forcing other men to teach them because they're not really going to accept that. It's almost like it's something that they have to take from within themselves and make the active choice and the decision to do. So, as much as I would like to socially engineer it, like any good utopian, um, and fix these problems, it is a question: how do you create a culture which is more celebratory of men and fatherhood that encourages men to actively choose to be better fathers, to seek out that knowledge, to as much as I almost, think if we could take that internet culture, which is all
Yes,
about pushing
just thinking
men
the
to
same.
be like,
Just
like this is how you can make so much money online and start this business and grind here and do that and do this. Yeah, and I think that there is a capacity for men to lock into those sorts of things. Like, how could we, how could we connect those two interests and those two energies to translate it into fatherhood?
And remove what exists. I think the dad bashing,
Yeah.
the mental load. I'm at home all day and the mental load.
Mm,
But now my husband must come home and cook and also do, you know,
mm.
that's maybe a broader topic and I don't want to go too far into there, but I, I think there's a lot of content that is anti-father. And
Yes.
it's just around, again, responsibility is in your individual capacity,
Mm,
reward the men for what they're doing right.
yeah.
Men can recognize where maybe they have actually, not in a negative, you're not doing enough, but hey, did you know your emotional support, your ability to create confidence and build courage and
Mm,
teach
mm,
resilience is so needed. It's so
yeah.
needed and so important. And if you
Yeah.
can't, if you're struggling to do that because that hasn't been a narrative, um, let's work on that. Let's encourage you because you have so much value to add. So I think it's
Exactly.
stop watching stuff that fuels a kind of anti-fatherhood, anti-men,
Mm, mm.
anti what they're good for. Oh, well, I'll just divorce him if he can't provide a nice car, never
Or
mind the
I'll just
fact
have
that
a baby
he
on my
emotion.
own. Yeah. I'll just
Yeah,
have a baby on my
these
own because I can
these these
just sort that
stories.
out. And yeah. And I think, yeah, if there was more of a messaging of these are all the different things that men do or that fathers do, like the development of empathy through rough and tumble play,
Mm,
that's what helps children to have empathy. I think there was also, I was listening that there's evidence that men encouraging their children to climb trees helps children to become more intelligent and to develop those synaptic connections in their brains and that kind of risk-taking behavior. But it's all of those things. I think that needs to be more talked about and more encouraged. The sense of knowing this is what you give as a father. You are valuable, and the things that you contribute are unique as well. It's different to what mothers bring,
mm,
and so that you are a vital part of this whole process of life and children and then on the broader scheme, society and culture and so on. So men are important.
men men are important, and tell them they're important, and teach your sons to want to
Exactly.
be fathers.
I suppose the last thing is that both of us have unfortunately lost our fathers and at a very young age as well. And I think that's also something that's not really acknowledged or spoken about, which is that men generally die earlier than women. You're going to lose your dad earlier than you're going to lose your mom, most likely. And so really to kind of highlight the impact of what it is to have a father, we can talk about what it means to lose a father
Mm,
and and I wonder because also both of us have lost our fathers in a very similar manner, which was
mm,
through
quick.
them being ill with cancer and dying in a hospital. And so
Mm,
it's not like we had the experience of watching them get old and arrive at old age. It just had happened. And I would be interested in your experience of the first few days after your dad passed, because I had a very distinct experience, which I think
mm,
connects to what it means to lose your father. And
mm.
I'm interested in your experience from a sort of not just an emotional aspect, but physiologically, just what was your feeling in those first couple of days afterwards?
The responsibility shifted to me. So
Yeah.
I was now no longer a child of a parent. I mean, I know I do have my
Mm,
mother, but really more in the sense of provider, person in control, person in charge. There was this weird
yeah.
shift where it didn't shift to my mother, it shifted to
Mm,
me.
yeah.
And so in that moment, I recognized that. And I was the one who mostly sorted things out,
Yeah.
practically clearing the house of things or sorting out files or finding the right documents, notifying people. I was the
Mm,
one that went to his shop. And luckily, I had a really amazing support system and had people around me to be public facing and telling people the news. But that would have been my responsibility to be the bearer of what had happened and to
mm,
sit with that feedback. So I've always said I can tell when people have their own parents because there's a kind of responsibility that hasn't shifted and they still
yes.
behave as if It doesn't matter if they're married, it doesn't matter if they're in their 50s, they still behave as if the ultimate authority or responsibility over their life and well-being sits with someone else. And I think when it
Mm.
shifts to sitting with you, whether you're married or not, there is still a sense of, oh, I am the adult now. And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
hard. I think
Yeah.
that's what I'm trying to say. It's hard. You don't, I saw a, a clip of this homeless guy who said his mother had gotten sick and very quickly he ended up homeless. And he said, you don't realize how keeping you clothed and fed and a roof over your head, just the simpleness of being taken care of,
Yeah.
what that means when you lose a parent, to have that just instantly removed from your life. And while I didn't have the extreme version of that, I definitely felt that
Mm.
all that upholdingness of responsibility to provide and care for me was just removed. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I had exactly the same thing. I was remember like the day after just shake my hands were shaking and it was this feeling because I was sitting in his office and I was trying to fix all of the problems that, came from a sudden death. And I remember that feeling that it's like the person that was between me and the sky is gone now.
Mm.
Now I'm the top of whatever this little hierarchy is, and there's no one between me and God anymore. Because as you say, it's interesting. My mother was also she's more on the sort of lateral side of things. It's not like she had now been placed above me. Everything fell onto me, and I felt the sense that the person who would normally be there to help me to fix the problems is no longer
Mm.
there. So if I messed up, there was that feeling of, oh, I can always go to my dad and my dad will help me to sort it out. Now my dad's gone. No one is going to help me sort it out. So now it's all my fault or all my responsibility. Like if something goes wrong, it's on me. And I now have all of these problems that I have to try and solve. And I also wonder if you had this, that then people, because there's such a strong after image of the father, your father, and who he was, and there is a sort of subtle expectation for you to step into his shoes, and then a kind of judgment if you don't live up to who he was, or a kind of expectation that you need to live out his legacy, and what does it mean to be
Mm.
the daughter of the father? And I also
Mm.
found that interesting because I think people really expected certain things of me, and then through his death I realized more who I was, which was different to him, and how,
Mm. Mm.
what were the things
Mm.
that I was then embodying from him. But then as people were expecting me to be him, I was suddenly noticing what was me and noticing that
Yes.
I do things differently, or I want different things, or I'm going to manage the situation differently. And that was also interesting, this real ripping apart of where
Mm.
before I'd really kind of, yeah, just seen us as our identities were mixed. I was his daughter, he was my father, and I was so much like him. We were kind of, two sides of the same coin. But then he died, and it was not just him disappearing, but then also me needing to reconstruct who I was without him,
Mm.
and noticing what was me and then what was him. And so that was a very interesting experience. Did you have that?
Yes, I think I did a lot of grieving in the freedom of recognizing maybe not everything was perfect.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I think that was probably what struck me. I definitely experienced a sense of people wanting me to then become their version of whatever he was to them.
Yes.
And in that moment, the cleaving happened and the separation, like you said, you've explained it really well. So yes, in a nutshell, yes. However, I I think I cleaved from a earlier age in many ways, and probably the most because I got married. So when I got married,
Mm.
a lot of the separation had already happened. So maybe it wasn't as profound or as intense. Um, but it does make me think. And again, to this understanding and this curiosity, to have compassion for those who never had a sense of identity from which to launch.
Yes. Yeah, that's
Without the
true.
father, without a level of stability and all the good things that they bring,
Mm.
to look with kindness on while we floated, having had already established quite a lot of traits, and
Yeah,
then figuring
that's
out,
true.
where we separated and they began. And the same with motherhood, but we're focusing on fatherhood. To
Mm,
have a launch pad for that, to think about not to think about entering into the world without anything between you and God.
mm,
When you
mm.
said that, I thought, what for all the people that have just felt it,
Yeah,
that sense of
anchorless.
vulnerability and exposure from the beginning. There's
Yeah.
actually, I think I've developed just in this moment quite a lot more compassion for those
Mm.
people. Mm.
For sure. I think that that's such a great insight, and the concept that your father really helps you to develop the sense of who you are.
Mm.
There's all the sort of superficial things of I am so and so because my surname is this and this is my family and this is, this is who we are. But there's also a feeling of this is who I am because my father is
Mm.
this kind of person, because my grandfather's this kind of person, and we are like this, and these are the things that we do. And it's so interesting because I have some friends and some people that I know who didn't grow up with that strong sense of a father figure. And as much as they will oscillate from being complete individuals, ships in the sea, and then at the same time you see them grappling for little scraps of who their father was and then using that to build their identity.
Wow.
But because it's not a kind of fully formed thing,
Mm.
you can see that they really don't know who they are because they don't even know who their father was, and they're trying to take these little pieces and nothing is actually forming together into a strong web. And then they oscillate from wanting to not be that person at all because of either the resentment or the sadness that that person wasn't in their life, and then also desperately trying to be that person because they're trying to figure out who they are in the world, and
Mm.
that's their reference point. So, but again, we come full circle back to the whole thing of what does it mean to have a father in your life and how important fathers are. This foundational um, stone upon which you build everything as a child. That's that launch pad for everything in the future, and they are just such a wonderful, unique part of our lives. Thank you for listening to the Perspicaz Podcast. We hope you'll join us for the next one, and as always, stay curious.